On day 18, we'll go back to the Henry Ford and visit the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation, and then we'll drive to Grand Rapids for the night. As we head out in the morning, the traffic's rather heavy, and we can see why. A truck is stopped in the middle of the road. Yesterday we were in Greenfield Village. Today we'll be in the Henry Ford Museum of American Innovation and then go to the Ford Rouge factory tour. Let's get started. This is the route we'll take through the museum. This is a huge museum and in some way rivals the Smithsonian American Museum of History because of it having so many different things to do with our country. Henry Ford had a very eclectic interest and collected almost anything from trains to buildings to mechanical engines to cars and almost everything else, and not even just Ford cars. The first display we'll look at is presidential limousines. This is the one that Ronald Reagan got back into after Hinckley shot him. And this is the presidential limousine of John F. Kennedy. This is the one he was shot in. Notice that the top comes off, and he decided to have it off that day in Dallas, fatally decided. Eisenhower had his bubble top limousine so people could see him, and he could still be riding in comfort. And Franklin Roosevelt had a convertible that he used called the Sunshine Special. And before him, this is what Theodore Roosevelt used. This is one of the first trains in the United States, and you can see it uses actually carriages shaped like stagecoaches. Nearby is the Allegheny locomotive, one of the most powerful steam locomotives ever built. The Rogers was last used to bring people from Washington, D.C. to the opening of the museum, and it's called the Presidential because it did bring some presidents with it. Not necessarily, he was saying. Note that way back in 1900, this was an electric truck. And this is the vehicle Charles Kuralt rode around the United States on the road for CBS. Ford's wife Clara did not like driving a Ford, so she drove this car. This was her personal car, a Detroit Electric model. And this is the oldest school bus in the United States. There are several race cars in the museum, including this old one and this more modern one. And this is the second vehicle to cross the United States from coast to coast. There weren't any highways back then. It's not that Ford really invented the car. He invented a cheap car that men could afford, like this Model T, and millions were produced. After World War II, we became a traveling nation and traveled trailers and also staying in hotels around the nation, and hotels sprung up everywhere as we traveled more to see the attractions of the United States. It is amazing how fancy some of these cars were back in 1904. They seem almost luxurious. Note that this vehicle from 1907 was a steam touring car. And this is the oldest surviving auto made in the United States. This bicycle was called a safety bicycle because it didn't have the big wheels, so when you fell, you didn't hurt yourself. And they have an actual functioning diner in the middle of the museum. Now let's go to the flight section. Henry Ford had hoped that this would be the Model T of the year, a cheaply built airplane everybody could afford and everybody would be flying. But it didn't work out that way. This is the actual plane that Admiral Byrd flew to the South Pole. One of the biggest things that airplanes were used for is the mail, and this is an airmail plane used for carrying mail. And commercial aviation has moved forward from the triplane to the more commercial jet now. One of the things that fascinates me about the Spirit of St. Louis is that there was no windshield. You cannot see straight forward. In fact, there's a gas tank in front of you. You have to look out a periscope to land. Now we'll be moving to Liberty and Justice section. Here we'll find an original copy of the Stamp Act from 1765, a copy of Common Sense by Thomas Paine, and a copy of the letter that Benedict Arnold wrote to the British. This is a contemporary account of the Battle of Bunker Hill. And here we have the actual kit that George Washington used when he went on military campaigns. Next, a copy of Uncle Tim's Cabin. This is the actual chair Lincoln was sitting in Ford's Theater when he was assassinated. And now we look at women's rights. Next up, segregation and its fall. This is the bus in Montgomery that Rosa Parks was riding on when she refused to move to the back of the bus. And this is where she was sitting. This machine makes light bulbs from beginning to end. And this is the oldest surviving steam engine in the world. Next, we look at a display of firearms of all different kinds. Next, we look into the future by looking into the past. We'll take it 20 years at a time, starting in 1900. And now it's time to look at the house of the future, an all-aluminum house built in the round. They never actually made very many of these. In fact, this is the only one that exists. Next, we head over to the Norman Rockwell exhibit. Since Henry Ford grew up on a farm, he's always been interested in farming equipment, so he's collected throughout the years many different types, including these old steam tractors called steam traction engines. That's how they got the term tractor. Henry Ford even built this experimental tractor to experiment with tractors on his own. Let's look at the changes that have happened in the American kitchen from 1700s to the 1840s and then to the 1890s, and now the 1930s. Next, we'll look at the different furnishings for those houses. This is a rocking chair that Cornelius Vanderbilt owned. And this is the chair that Mary Todd Lincoln bought for her house.
Across the bay a lady waits, hold me tight.
And now let's look at a little bit more studio glass.
If the weather keeps on holding and the wind is right, I'll be wrapped up in my sweet one's arms tonight, and we will sail away.
At the Made in America area, we look at exhibits of things that were invented in the United States, including the Model T. In fact, they build a Model T every single day here, and you can help them do that. But let's look at some of the other things that were invented. Brick making machines, for instance. And glass presses. Cyrus McCormick's Reaper. Now it's time for me to head to the Ford Rouge factory tour and look around there, one of the largest factories in the world.
My mind is on the one I wait to see.
First, we'll visit the visitor center and get an idea. Here they make trucks right now, and we'll get to understand how they do that, but they have other models on display.
And we will sail away on the wings of love into the night.
After the visitor center, we will head across the walkway to the factory itself and walk around on the top level, looking down. Now this is what the factory used to look like when they made everything by hand. But now it's all modular, and they just basically put the vehicles together here. And then it's time to head to Grand Rapids for the night.
Then a smile comes upon me as I look across the bow. I see a lady on the side, but she will as I head for the shore, 'cause tonight I'm gonna take her for a ride, and we will sail away on the wings of love into the night, cast out our fortunes.
It's a fairly long ride to Grand Rapids, and the sun is setting before we get there.
Dream about life will someday be. Sail away, we'll sail away on the wings of love into the night, cast out our fortunes on the sea. We will go to the street.
We travel on through the night, and late in the evening we arrive at our hotel and check in and go to sleep, thus ending day 18.